the cornerstone of feminism is choice for women.
If given the choice, most women would stay at home. They got to dress like men, and they got to have the same attitudes towards sex as men, and they got to work in the workplace exactly as men.
Hi everyone, it's Miss Dragonfly, the relationship whisperer, back again. Welcome back to my channel where we discuss all things relationships with the aim to make marriage great again. In this video, Michael Knowles, a well-known conservative personality, is going up against a couple of feminists regarding has feminism made women happy? So let's take a look.
What is feminism?
I think the most common definition is the social, political, and economic equality between the sexes. So according to that definition, I would definitely identify as a feminist.
Okay.
Yeah, in general, I agree with that definition. I believe that we should not be discriminated unfairly on the basis of sex. If I had to add any addition to feminism.
I would agree with all that, and then I would also add on just kind of adding more cultural currency to just female spaces, women's interests, and just women's proclivities in general.
I actually think feminism does the opposite of that in practice, and frankly, going all the way back to the beginning of feminism in the 18th century, probably my definition of feminism would be Gloria Steinem's definition. She was the very famous feminist of the second wave, which is that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Feminism is the idea that men and women are not complementary, they're not different and helpful to one another, but they're identical and indiscernible. That there are some superficial differences. You ladies might be a little prettier perhaps than I am, but all in all, we're basically exactly the same. And I don't think that's true. I think it's a false view of human nature, and I think it's harmful to everybody, and especially harmful to women.
Right. I've worked with Gloria Steinem's company, Women's Media Center, for like 4 years back in college.
My condolences.
And obviously that's like a more crass interpretation of, I think, what she meant by that, which I think is more so, she's more so characterizing the fact that women in general, when they're taught how to self-actualize, it's typically tied to contingency on a man and getting married and starting a family, versus men, when they're told the ways to self-actualize, it doesn't necessarily require a woman. So obviously her saying a woman needs a man the way a fish needs a bicycle sounds crass and like she's being a bit misandrous, and obviously some radical interpretations may take it that way. But I think what she's trying to say is that women, you can like define yourself and your career and your potential outside of simply marriage and children.
What do you mean by the phrase self-actualize?
Just like live up to your potential, use your rational faculties, use the design of your potential in your brain.
I agree that I want to live up to my highest potential. I want women to live up to their highest potential. I want total human flourishing. But I think you've given away the game on the radical and liberal foundation of feminism, which is the notion that it comes purely from the self. It's a matter of self-liberation that I can do totally self-sufficiently, as if I were an island unto myself. But no man is an island unto himself. And so I didn't make myself. I didn't create the family that I was born into. I didn't create the community that I was born into, the country that I was born into. I take the opposite view of the liberal view. The liberals say that man is fundamentally an individual. The conservatives would say, no, man is a social creature. Man is a political animal. And so the irony, I think, of someone like a Gloria Steinem saying that or insinuating that we just want women to live up to their fullest potential, is that the way that she and the feminists have done it is to totally erase women. And I think this goes back way further than the second wave. You sometimes hear conservatives, the squishy kind, they say, we love the feminism, but only the second wave, not the third wave, or we like the first wave, not the second, or whatever. We're on like the 10th wave now. But it's been a problem from the beginning. Even Mary Wollstonecraft, who founds feminism with the vindication of the rights of woman, she writes that Providence has created men in such a way that they are more inclined to virtue, and they're more endowed with virtue. And I think that's exactly what Gloria Steinem thinks, because the way that second wave feminism actually was practiced was it denied the virtues particular to women, and it said the only way to be virtuous and to flourish is to be a man. So if women want to be virtuous and flourish, they got to dress like men, and they got to have the same attitudes towards sex as men, and they got to work in the workplace exactly as men do, and they just have to pretend to be men. But I think that's very disrespectful to women and harmful to them, because if a woman tries to be a man, she's always going to fail. Just look at the Penn swim team now when the men compete against the women swimmers and defeat them. This is why some feminists wisely are turning against the transgender ideology. I think women are great. Women have a wonderful nature, and when women are fully women, they can really flourish. And when they pretend to be men, they get miserable.
Okay, Michael Knowles made a very good point. One that I personally always make is that feminists want women to be like men, to pretend to be like men. I mean, why? Women have their own unique qualities that feminists don't appreciate. And they actually agree with men and the misogynists that what we naturally do and our natural qualities don't cut it. Only what the men do have value, and so we've been oppressed. That's why we haven't been able to do all the important stuff that men have always been able to do. And so they want women to be like men, to have the value that men do. So in that case, well, you're really looking down on women. So it's a great thing that men and women are different, because we have different skills and we bring different skills to the table. All right, let's continue and see what they say.
I think what a lot of feminists would push back on or worry about is this idea that we have ascribed gender to certain things that are kind of agendered. So for example, when it comes to the workplace, the idea that like, oh no, women must stay at home, going out and working is a man's job, seems to be something that a lot of people have contention with, because it seems like, I'm not saying that women don't have a place at home taking care of children, but it doesn't seem like it should necessarily be limited to just that. So for example, even like throughout history, you still have women who, despite taking care of home, also have like side jobs or side hustles or stuff like that to help contribute to the family. So I think this whole idea that's like, oh no, like women are just trying to be men, sometimes I wonder, oh no, we are just saying that this is for a man to do, even though it seems like there's more opportunity for women to participate in those arenas as well.
I think you've just made my point, though, which is that you say throughout history, including long before feminism ever came onto the scene, women did plenty of things, in addition to just being barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, right? They were involved in their community. They had side hustles, as you put it. So they did all these things. I mean, I think of the most famous anti-feminist American of the 20th century. It was Phyllis Schlafly. Phyllis Schlafly had 6 kids. She was a housewife. She said the only person whose permission she needs for her political activism is her husband's, which irritated feminists to no end. She's one of the most important political figures of the whole century. She single-handedly killed the Equal Rights Amendment, traveled all over the country, one of the most vaunted figures in the American right. She was able to do a lot of things in public, but she recognized that her particular role that her husband never could have, that no man on earth ever could have, even if he kids himself, is to have children, to be a woman, to be graceful, to do the things that men can't do. And so she can do things beyond that as well. But if you erase the particular advantages of women, then women are put at a disadvantage.
I mean, the problem is women were also excluded from doing a lot of things. So I don't think anyone here thinks there are no differences between men and women. But there's a lot of overlap as well. And while men and women may be different on something on average,
it's the particular advantages of women. Then women are put at a disadvantage.
Yeah, all right, I have to agree with Michael again about that. Women do have all these unique qualities that men don't have and cannot do. And so if you don't recognize that and expect women to do what men do, they're not going to do it as well. That's frankly because you're not built, you're not designed to do that. You're designed to do what you were designed to do. And so you do what you naturally do much better. So forcing us to be like men or do the things that men do, we're not going to be able to compete with men. Simply because, that's their field. It's like expecting a beagle to do guard duty as well as a German Shepherd. It's never going to be as good as a German Shepherd as doing guard duty, because it was never built that way. So we won't have the advantage of a German Shepherd to doing the guard duty. So if we're just going to judge on guard duty, being a guard, the ability, then the beagle is never going to be up to scratch as a German Shepherd, no matter how hard the beagle tries. The beagle has its own qualities, its own abilities, and that's being a sniffer dog, and it should be valued as a sniffer dog, because that's what it's been designed to do, is natural gifts, and so we do that very well. All right, let's continue.
I mean, the problem is women are also excluded from doing a lot of things. So I don't think anyone here thinks there are no differences between men and women. But there's a lot of overlap as well. And while men and women may be different on something on average, to look at a woman like I think you and some of your other conservatives are under fire for saying, oh, if it's a female pilot, I'm automatically going to assume that this person is incompetent.
I've never said that. Though if an airline tells me that they are prioritizing DEI over merit in the cockpit, I would probably book another airline.
Okay, and that's, I guess that's a little different. I get what you're saying. I get that. But my point is like to say women are just emotional, more emotional than men. That may be true on average, but to then look at a woman and just be like, automatically I'm going to assume this woman is more emotional, I think that isn't, that the lack.
So why is it true on average though?
It may be true on average because we're different. I've never said we're not different,
right.
But the problem is to say we're different and then put us into categories and be like, there can be no overlap, women have to do this role.
All right, she admits women are different. So they're not all crazies there. At least she has some common sense to admit a certain reality. So let's see what else she has to say besides women flying a plane.
And men have to do this role. That's, I think, what feminism is pushing back on.
What you're arguing for is a kind of feminism that says, actually, all the differences between men and women, it's totally true in the aggregate, in these two different types. But on rare occasion, there's going to be some woman.
Not that rare. Like, let's say, okay, gender roles. Like, let's say most people, let's say 70 to 80% of people will fall into natural gender roles. But then there's still 20% of our population that may not. And do we make a society where we force that 20% into these roles, or do we allow choice? I think a lot of feminism, the cornerstone of feminism is choice for women. You can't stay home.
I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure, because there was a famous debate between Betty Friedan, who was the prominent American feminist, and Simone de Beauvoir, one of the most famous feminists of the 20th century. It was in 1975, and Betty Friedan said what you said. She said, look, I think we should give women a choice. Maybe they want to go out into the workplace, or maybe they want to stay home and raise their kids, but they should have a choice. And Simone de Beauvoir, who was a more consistent and intelligent feminist, said there can't be a choice. And the reason there can't be a choice is that if given the choice, most women would stay at home. And if most women stay at home, women will not be free. If we want true women's liberation, women must be forced to be free. And Friedan recoiled from this because she knew it wasn't going to play well in Peoria. But Simone de Beauvoir had the right point, and I think the more consistent feminists have agreed with her.
I don't know. I mean, feminism has, it's gone so many different directions.
All right, they're actually forcing women, not giving women the choice to either stay at home or do those roles, because she was actually realistic to a point in knowing that given the choice, women would prefer to stay at home and not doing those roles. But then again, that means women, you're taking choice away from women. And I thought that was what feminism was all about, giving women the freedom to choose and be what they want. However, when it comes to a stage where women want to be something that they don't want women to be, then it comes to, let's force women to do what we want them to do. Isn't that oppression then? Well, let's see what the girls have to say in response.
So to pick the feminists that we don't agree with for this debate, I don't know if that's conducive to.
Also, I'm not necessarily sure when you're saying oh no, most women would stay at home. That's a choice that they would have, because when you look at the uprisings of feminism, or when it gained the most traction, it was post-war era. Partly because of the reason why is because during these war eras, men went out, they were drafted, they had to go fight, etc., etc. Women were expected to take up more traditional male spaces, work, and when the men came back, what ended up happening is that a lot of women did not want to leave the jobs that they had. They wanted to keep the somewhat level of financial independence that they were able to gain. And that's why we see these huge feminist uprisings during those periods of time. So it seems to me, if you're saying that most women would stay home, that just wouldn't happen. Women would have not had these feminist movements go forward.
Well, the feminists didn't want to leave their jobs, but women broadly perhaps did. So anecdotally, people write in a lot and they tell me, Michael, at least while my kids are little, I'd love to stay home and raise them. Maybe I'll go back to work after, but I just can't. You can't raise a family in America for the average person today on one income. And that's a result of women entering the workforce and wages decrease, which is why not only the radical left, but also the more commercially minded right wing was in favor of that. It's the same reason they're in favor of mass migration. It just lowers wages for people. A lot of women, however, seem to feel not that they have the choice to go to work, but that they have to. And this is expressed in a famous study that came out of UPenn and was published by Yale in 2008, which was the paradox of declining female happiness. And I love the way this study opens up. Right in the abstract it says, despite the past 35 years, I'm paraphrasing, but despite the past 35 years showing so much marked progress and improvement in the lives of women, women's happiness, according to this meta-analysis, has declined, both absolutely and relative to men. So it's not even just that everyone got more miserable because of, I don't know, a bad economy or something. Women in particular became less happy, despite all these objective improvements to their lives. So to me, the obvious rejoinder to that is, well, maybe those objective improvements, namely feminism, that's the thing that happened between 1973 and 2008, maybe that wasn't an objective good. Maybe that was just illusory.
Well, to me, the obvious rejoinder of that is that women are becoming disillusioned with the life they had prior. They're like leaving the cave, so to speak, allegorically. And also, I don't think you should use self-reported happiness as a metric of justice or any like objective good, because you can plot self-reported happiness with pretty much any variable. Like highest reported crime, violent crime in the United States, also is directly correlated to self-reported happiness. Does that mean one causes the other? No. Does that mean we should think
what do you mean by that?
Crime
Highest violent crime is correlated?
I'm just saying in the periods of time when we've had the most violent crime in the United States, there's also a correlation between highest rates of self-reported happiness.
Well, not according to the survey I just cited, right? If happiness has been declining steadily, especially for women since 1973 to 2008, you had a major crime spike in the early 90s, but you didn't have a major spike in happiness. So perhaps there's some survey that you're referring to in some city somewhere,
Well,
but it wouldn't.
But also even women
this.
living traditional lifestyles are seeing a downfall in happiness. So why is it that the women who are still living the type of lifestyle that you would probably prescribe to women are also having a decrease in happiness?
Also,
I'm not convinced of that.
The Institute of Family Studies did a big, and there's a lot of data out there that actually children make you less happy. So there is this problem happening where we're like, okay, why are people less happy? But we don't know. We don't know what it is.
Sure. Again,
and then you would expect then that if you looked at the most unhappiest countries, you would expect Canada, the Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries, because they're very egalitarian, and you're not seeing that they actually have higher happiness levels.
Well,
than
they have the highest
here.
rates of alcoholism in the world. You think of Denmark, Norway, Iceland in particular.
But
So I don't know how happy they are.
Now you're changing, but if we're going to just go by what makes
I
people
don't think
happy,
alcoholics
I
are
don't
like the
know if
happiest people.
I think there are arguments to be made about like community and those things may make people less happy. But this idea that's because women aren't having children, when we also have data, a lot of data that shows children, especially in the United States, has the biggest happiness gap. And then we're seeing that other countries that are more feminist are also not having, like, if you compare like Scandinavian countries to like the East, like my parents are immigrants from Iran. Iran has really high unhappiness levels. A lot of countries
Naturally,
yeah, exactly. So I don't know if you can say that this is causing that, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, Nordic countries also have much more homogeneity, which is correlated with political happiness. But so there are all of those differences.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the point about children making you unhappy and the point about leaving the cave, I think those are both a little bit of a cope, because they're belied by the fact that if it were just that women were coming into their own now and they were recognizing the oppression of which they were not conscious previously, then why would they keep getting less and less happy? You know, at a certain point, aren't you supposed to turn the corner and become more happy in your independence? But that's not what's happened. For 35 years, it just gets worse, worse, and worse, including relative to men. And then for children, you look over the past, 70 plus years now, 74 years, since 1950 to present day, the marriage rate has dropped by 60%, and the birth rate has dropped by 50%. So just looking at the whole society, we are having many, many fewer children than we were before, and yet we're much less happy.
Even like
Sure,
places
whatever
like Pakistan are having less kids.
Sure, I'm just pointing out, you're saying that having fewer children makes you happier, and I'm saying we're having many fewer children and Americans are much less happy. And you see this even beyond just
but that's
random
not,
surveys.
you can't link that.
I kind of want to push back on this idea that we've gotten more unhappy as time has progressed, because at least to my understanding, what's happened in the last 20 or 30 years is an increased awareness of like mental health and what that means. So it's not necessarily that people were really happy before and now suddenly are miserable.
Yeah.
It's just that now we're actually having data where people can talk openly about their mental health, unhappiness, and not be as stigmatized as before. Mm-hmm. If we look at the 1950s and even like housewives around that time, we see like there is actually like a huge rate of like narcotic usage and basically like prescriptions to that level. So I'm not necessarily, if I would go as far to say, we've gotten unhappiness as time, we've gotten more unhappy as time has gone by. I would say more likely, oh no, we've been able to properly report, measure, and assess mental health as time has gone by.
And
I mean,
medicate.
listen, I'm very inclined towards your view that social scientific studies are bunk. I mean, there's a major replication prices. I think it's all ridiculous. I will cite those social science stats when they serve my argument, because why not? That's what we do these days. But I agree. I'm skeptical of measuring happiness and all the rest of it. But on the mental health point, I think here we do have some pretty firm data, and it contradicts the argument you're making, which is right now, 1 in 5 middle-aged women in the country is hooked on antidepressant drugs. On any given day, they're taking them. Women are 2.5 times as likely as men to take these depression drugs. It is ubiquitous at this point. And the rates of taking depression drugs are going up. It's getting much worse. So if we're not getting less and less happy, why do people keep taking more and more depression drugs?
Well, why were housewives in the 50s downing like a bottle of wine at lunch every day? I'm just saying.
Yeah,
now we're
I'm not so sure. I mean, these are anecdotes.
We're supplanting self-medication now with actually like medically backed drugs that actually help women with their mental health issues.
I don't know that
it's
they
also
help.
now that when you're sad, you just go to the doctor and they give you antidepressants. I don't know.
Well, Michael does make a very good point that with all the opportunities that women have now, and women are free to pursue their career like many do, and so many women have to work now. It's not a must, it's not a choice anymore. They must work because the way society is, and that is what the feminists want. But women are getting more and more unhappy. Okay, all these antidepressants and so forth for drugs, so many drugs are being prescribed. You know, before women just had to look after the household, be the homemaker, that sort of thing. And fought for the right to work and so forth. But then the right to work become a choice to work has now become a need to work. And they still have to do what they do. So women have just had to take on more work than what historically they have had to do. And I don't know about you, but generally, you know, if the more work that someone has to do, I don't think they'll get happier. I think they'll get more and more miserable. Women are pushing back and saying, well, in the 50s, women are down in the bottle. So let's see where this goes.
How much more depressed people actually are, other than the fact that they're just dishing them out to everybody.
And they're dishing them out more and more and more. Sure, you can blame the pharmaceutical industry or the medical industry. I'm just pointing out, you know, in order to argue against these social science statistics, one has to just turn toward unfalsifiable anecdotes and memes. You know, the housewives were all miserable in the 50s. They were secretly, you know, drinking behind their husbands' backs. But I don't know, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. All I have are the data available
well, the data
to me,
is
and the
just
data
saying
are
that
getting
more
worse.
people are on antidepressants. It's not telling you why. It's not telling you what caused it. It's not telling you.
Depression,
so that's,
presumably, is causing
well,
it.
that's what we're debating here, is what could have caused it. You're saying, oh, it's
No, but I'm not saying, you know, maybe they hate their husband, maybe they hate their kids, maybe they don't like the, you know, the weather in their town.
Like, I think
but
ADHD
in any
is
case,
a great example of this. Anyone now can just be like, oh, I have trouble focusing. Does everyone have ADHD, or are people just getting these drugs? Like, you know, these are questions that we should ask before we jump to a conclusion. That
No, I agree. Look, I think that they're pathologizing a lot of ordinary aspects of human nature. But I think part of the reason that we do that is because we're so radically misinterpreting human nature, which brings us right back to feminism. The clearest example of this is the transgender argument, which is all anyone ever talks about these days. I'm frankly sick of it. We know that men and women are different, but that shows you, you know, a major confusion about human nature. If a man can become a woman, then we have been really wrong about anthropology for a long time. And most reasonable people know a man can't become a woman. But that error in human nature goes back much earlier than transgenderism. You know, this is why I have pity for the feminists who are trans-exclusionary radical feminists, because they don't realize that it was their own ideology that led to this. The premise of transgenderism is that men and women are basically the same, so much so that one can become the other. But if that's true, you know, then that has to come from somewhere, and where it came from was the redefinition of marriage, to say that a man and a woman is the same as a man and a man is the same as a woman and a woman. And that comes from the sexual revolution, and that comes from feminism, which says a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Yeah, I agree. These errors in human nature can lead to all sorts of problems.
Did you say with transgenderism is people thinking that there's no differences, and why would they need to transition?
That's a great question.
I don't think that's what transgenderism believes, that there's no difference between men and women.
Transgenderism believes that men and women are so similar that one can become the other. Which is different than the feminists who say men and women are so similar that a woman can do anything a man can do. But transgenderism takes that principle to the extreme, which is men and women are so similar. They're not complementary. Sex is not immutable. It's not an inseparable accident of being, as you know, an Aristotelian or St. Thomas Aquinas might say. But no, it's actually just kind of a social construct. And it's so socially constructed that I can go down to my doctor and have him reconstruct my chest, and all of a sudden I've magically become the opposite sex. That error comes from feminism.
Okay, before we pivot to transgenderism, can we go back to the happiness feminist conversation
Sure.
and tie it up? So I wanted to ask you, do you think that should be the ultimate good and the metric for which we base like our justice system and our just overall societal progress on is self-reported happiness?
Well, I don't know even what you mean by societal progress. I mean, justice is a habit of virtue that inclines the will to give to one what he deserves, right? So it's about deserts.
Right.
And so we protect certain rights and we enforce certain laws, or at least we used to. We don't really do that as much in this country anymore. And an aspect of political justice would be human flourishing. So when we talk about happiness, I'm very interested in happiness, but I'm interested in happiness in the way that Aristotle's interested in happiness, which is eudaimonia, a way to live the best possible life. And I think that we can know something about that through our faculties of reason, which are objective, and if reason weren't objective and at least somewhat reliable, we couldn't have self-government. Now, the way that happiness is often used in our modern culture is just
hedonism.
Is hedonism, like the utilitarians, right? Just means getting pleasure and avoiding pain, or is just totally subjective to the point where you say, well, don't yuck my yum. What's de gustibus non disputandum est. Maybe I like this and you don't like this. Well, sure. I mean, restaurants have menus for a reason, but there must be some limiting principle here. We must know something about what is conducive to human happiness. And if we don't, then how do we have self-government?
So I want to go back.
Completely agree. I just don't know if self-reported happiness is more congruent with the subjective reports of happiness, or that eudaimonia that you're referring to.
Sure, it's just the best we've got.
All right. Michael does make a good point that they're trying to eliminate the differences between men and women so much that it's much easier for people to push transgenderism. There's so many differences. You only have to have some chest surgery or take a couple of hormones, or not even that, just grow your hair long and put on a dress and you're a woman. Funny how it doesn't really apply to men, but mostly to women. In conclusion, look, feminism hasn't made women happy. Feminism pushes the point that women should be men because there's no difference. Like he brought up an important point, one famous feminist, I've forgotten what her name is. She says that men don't give women the choice, because if you give them the choice, they'll just want to stay at home and look after kids. That's mean forcing women to do something they rather not do in order to achieve what your objective is. I mean, your narrative is. So, in conclusion, look, at the end of the day, as humans, we can only ever be happy if we're able to be ourselves and do what we want, have the freedom to do what we want. And it seems to be feminism has been against that. It's trying to achieve an objective aim. I mean, you look at all the feminists sprouting up, women should be out there doing STEM subjects, doing science, engineering, all that, and then ask, well, why don't you do that? They want other women to do that. To back up their claim, but they themselves don't want to do that. Why? Because they don't want to do, because it's not in their nature to, but they won't admit it. So those are my thoughts on this matter. What do you think? Let me know by leaving your comments below, and if you've enjoyed the video, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And for more info on relationships and social issues, check out this video. Well, that's it for this segment, and until I see you next, remember to stay strong, confident, and awesome.